UK Motor Talk.
Well, hello everyone, we're back, I'm back, we are all around you, and whatever, because we were talking about surround sound prior to coming on air, but it's a pleasure to be here again. I'm Mike. Guys, please, rescue me. No.
I'm Jim, good evening, nice to see you back and on sparkling form as well. Congratulations on the resurrection. Didn't know it was Easter.
It tingled.
Good evening, I'm Graham.
And I'm Dave. Rumours of his demise have been rudely exaggerated. Nice to see you back, Mike. How you doing?
Even if we are now calling him Lazarus.
I'm tepid, yes. What have I missed? What's going on?
Well, quite literally World War III you appear to have missed, as that's been properly kicking off. Well, it had kicked off in the last podcast or two, hadn't it? But since you were last with us, it has now just properly kicked off to the point where even if people weren't concerned about it, the price of fuel this week has gone a tad on the ballistic side, hasn't it? I've never seen it this high. It was 170, 180 a litre. I'm sure there's the odd service station that's got to be nudging £2 a litre now, hasn't it, for diesel, and 10-15p cheaper for unleaded. But it's gone absolutely crackers.
M25 a couple of days ago was about 190 for unleaded. And even my sort of local garage on the A21 was at 161. And it's going to get worse.
I can remember drinking in my youth, obviously at a legal age, substances like white lightning, which will soon be cheaper to run a car on, I reckon, than actually putting unleaded in.
Any minute now, sort of running it on finest single malt Scotch whisky will be cheaper than running it on actual petrol, won't it?
I think when you factor in road tax and things, it probably is. I'm being totally and utterly bummed by this. I'm sure I've moaned about this many times before, but road tax is like 360 quid now for the Mini. And I was getting a useful 22 to the gallon out of the car. I'm now getting something stupid like 185 miles to about 70 quid's worth of fuel because of the fuel price, which is painful. It has to be said, quite painful. I just want to come back actually to the war in Ukraine, which we all agree is terrible. Obviously, it doesn't need really to be said, but I have seen some fantastic things in this, and that is, whilst we're talking about fuel, Russian tanks running out of fuel and being nicked by Ukrainian farmers in tractors. It is the most joyous thing to watch.
Absolutely superb. Just nicking this Ukrainian farmer, with a collection of SAM missiles on the back of his tractor. The person, where'd you get that from? Oh, just nicked it. Oh, right, fair enough. It's like, well, no one's going to argue with you at that stage, are you? And once you've got a tank as well, if you just lock yourself in, it's fairly hard for anyone to get you out of it, isn't it?
That's the idea, I think, isn't it?
People are putting them on eBay.
Lightly used.
I've seen these. Honestly, it says fully functioning tank needs fuel on eBay. Someone's got a good sense of humour. You're in the middle of a war zone and you think, I know what I'm going to do. They've got the big plums. I'm going to hook this tank up to my tractor. And this video of this Russian soldier legging it and trying to catch up with this tank.
That's coming out of my pay, which I'm probably not going to get anymore.
Can you imagine the penalty from the boss if you happen to be in charge of a Russian tank and you lose it?
God.
That's not going to be
Vlad the Invader is not going to like this.
No. The thing is, I mean, not wanting to go too political, but I mean, what I have been quite sort of buoyed by throughout this is this. I mean, there is still humour in this, and that's a case in point. Sort of people half-inching Russian tracked vehicles with tractors. You can't look too badly on that. That just shows that even in the midst of what is the most dire situation, there is still a bit of a humorous side to it, and I think we have to cling to that. Otherwise, we're all going to go mad, aren't we? It's similar to the sort of Ukrainian sort of cyclist sort of whizzing up and down past the tanks parked at the side of the road. Nobody's going to stop me going from my bike ride, Russians or not. Particularly not Russians. You've got to admire the spirit, and I think that's something that's a bit of a lesson to us all, really.
Definitely.
There's certainly been an outpouring of support. We've seen quite a few, and we've got a collection point at work, actually, for we'd put out an appeal for donations and, a list of items, and if you can spare this, that, the other, here's a little list. If you can cobble it together, we've got two baskets in the showroom, and within about 18 seconds of that first post going out, both baskets were full up, and the rest of the showroom just piled up remarkably quickly to the stage where, I got in on Monday morning and you could hardly see through the window for stuff, and we filled up a van load of stuff, dropped that off to the people who are running it on lorries to and from Poland twice a week, 3 times a week. But they've just said they've got to the stage where we can have a few more days of this, and then, sorry, the warehouse is going to be full. We'll have nowhere to store it. So calm down on the donations for a bit until we can get it all over there. So I think that's been really nice. The community spirit, the support, the, whatever you need. And it wasn't just people who bought the odd thing or, I'll chuck an extra can of beans in with the weekly shop and drop that down. People have gone out and bought bags and bags and bags of stuff, all brand new,
quite
bedding,
literally
food,
bags,
clothing, medicine, bags and bags and bags full of bags, actual bags, tents, sleeping bags, you name it. There were
everything,
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds people had spent on this, and it was nice to see. So that camaraderie, that blitz spirit, that whatever you want to call it, it has been nice to see. So we won't dwell on it too long, but it's obviously just an absolutely rubbish time for everyone in Ukraine. But the support has been quite nice to see. It does restore a little bit of faith in humanity.
Well, just to bring it onto motoring related matters, which it is. I mean, basically Russia's being isolated from the rest of the world, and this is obviously having an effect on the industry, the motor industry, because pretty much every motor manufacturer that has any dealings with Russia has severed ties. I mean, there's BMW, VW Group, Volvo, Volkswagen, and Nissan has just said that it's going to suspend work on the factory in St. Petersburg, which has been churning out all sorts of stuff, X-Trails and the like. That's all gone. It does make you wonder. I mean, there's going to be an awful lot of cancelled orders. There's going to be a lot of cars, left-hand drive Jags and high-end stuff that usually goes to the oligarchs in various parts of Russia that are now going to be surplus to requirements. So if you want to get yourself a cheap G-Wagen or a Jag or a high-end Range Rover, probably with dubious interior upholstery, keep an eye on the internet, because there's going to be quite a few sitting there at the docks that they're going to want to get rid of fairly soon, I'd say.
I'd rather like that joke I saw about the board of directors of ZIL saying, "Look, at last our time has come. We're back in business."
Yeah, exactly. BMW, we don't
enjoyed that.
But you'd need to be a Russian oligarch to afford the fuel to drive it back from the port, and that's if you picked it up from the port nearest to you.
This is very true. It's interesting. I mean, again, we joking around. I mean, it's a very serious subject, but I mean, Russia's in danger of almost becoming like its Cuban puppet, where they're going to have all these BMWs that nobody can afford or can get the spare parts for. So they're all going to end up having Lada 1.6 engines shoehorned into them because they're the only reliable bit of machinery that still exists that you can buy bits for in Russia going forward, I'd say.
So you just hope the factories aren't seized by the state then used to create their... I knew you said Soviet. Can't say Soviet.
Well, Freudian, but you joke.
Yeah, equivalents, and it's just mad. The world is mad.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, it has had a further knock-on effect in the motoring world, hasn't it? As well as rising fuel prices, further shutdowns and shortages of car parts. If it wasn't bad enough already with a shortage of semiconductors, Mini get quite a few of their parts out of Ukraine, so it happened. So they've been left without parts. They've had to shut the factory for a good couple of weeks. I don't think it's going to be open until about the 18th of March at the earliest, as it stands. So if you've got a new Mini on order and you've been waiting for a while, I think you might be waiting a little bit longer for it, unfortunately.
I think we're entering a third world war, which is part military and part economic. And I think the way things are going, it's going to have disastrous effects on Western Europe, possibly a bit less on China, certainly parts of Asia, and certainly on America. And I think Biden was planning to get up this afternoon on do an address which basically restrict the purchases of any oil out of Russia, which is the world's third largest producer of oil.
Over here, though, it's only really a small amount that comes over by comparison to where oil comes from everywhere else. I think the danger is that this will get whipped up and hyped up by the media, and then we get another idiotic fuel crisis again. The price is also going up, which will perhaps stop people from panic buying it for the moment, because it's obviously becoming very expensive. But the last thing we need is this nonsense.
I think I heard the story in Germany they're running out of jerry cans. That seems appropriate, doesn't it? But apparently there's a shortage of jerry cans now to stock your garage up with fuel, which is what they're all expecting to do. How they expect to get Russian gas into a jerry can, I don't know. But
well, I mean, it's not as if as you say, it's not as if the majority of the fuel that we get comes from Russia. I mean, it's more gas, I think, isn't it? As you say, Graham,
yep.
that we are reliant on. Oil generally comes from places with deserts. So, yeah, I think that is the danger, isn't it? People do panic and go, oh, my God, they're cutting off supply, so we're not going to be able to get petrol. And it's the usual sheep mentality. Let's hope that people keep a bit of a calmer head this time around and see it for what it is. It's cutting off gas more than anything else. Britain does not generally get its oil from Russia.
My good lady was telling me last night when she got home that she'd passed a garage that she often uses near Bexhill, which is a very cheap independent, and it was queued for about half a mile in either direction on the road, and the forecourt was chocker. When she came back past it about 3 hours later, they'd run out of fuel.
Oh, God, here we go again.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to start to see it again.
Just when it looked like we'd be able to get out there and start seeing the world again, eh? It seems like we've been stuck at home for a very long time, with lots of fuel in the tank, but not being able to go anywhere. Now things are starting to open up again. And in fact, I actually booked the tickets for the London to Brighton mini run, which doesn't go from Crystal Palace anymore because I don't like having cars in Crystal Palace, as it turns out, because of environmental things. So that has to now go from somewhere else I haven't looked yet. The idea of being able to jump on a train or on a boat or something and get your way across the water and drive across Europe or do some tour, whatever, just getting out there was very appealing. But we seem to lurch from disaster to disaster.
I've suspended planning my grand tour of France, which I was intending to do this summer, because I just don't think it's going to happen. I think things are going to get worse for a while, and certainly it's going to be more difficult to travel anywhere in Europe, I think, for a while.
I'm concerned when you say Grand Tour of France, so I assumed that you would make your way to the nearest vineyard, and that's probably where you'd end up parked.
No, I know one or two. There's a cooperative which I know in the south of France, which I've used on several occasions, where you take in a 20-litre plastic can, and it has basically a fuel filler, the same as you would on a petrol pump, and you just pump in 20 litres and pay for it.
20 litres? I love the idea of that.
That's why I was overloaded the last time I came back, but there you go, it's another story.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid Graham has been sunk this evening.
Yes, perhaps dangerous to go on ferries when you're that heavily loaded with liquids. Took me several days to consume it.
several hours. I suspect things are going to settle down. I mean, the minute anybody, there's jitteriness, isn't there? I mean, even at the best of times, people are jittery around fuel. And then when you've got the West saying, right, we're cutting off supply from Russia, which was always going to happen.
Yep.
Ultimately, you're trying to cut them off. And what's one of Russia's biggest exports? Fuel and oil, isn't it? Oil, gas, whatever. And it was always going to happen. And once people adapt to that and realise that, all right, it's going to be a bit more expensive for a little while until we find an alternative supply. Yes, you're going to have to get used to the fact it's going to cost a bit, but there's always going to be a supply. It just means the supply is going to be in more demand, so you're going to pay more for it, which isn't great, but compared to what's going on for the poor people of Ukraine, it's a small price to pay, metaphorically as well as financially.
A tiny inconvenience.
The American market is going to get somewhat of a surprise when it goes from 10 cents for the gallon to $10 for the gallon, which is... the two ends of the spectrum that they're in the middle of at the moment.
I suspect, though, that the US gets very little, if any, oil and gas from Russia, really. Does it? I mean, given the huge reserves it has of its own, does it actually even need to think about Russia? It's more the European states.
Well, apparently America is already eating into its emergency reserve stocks held at the refineries. That started as of yesterday, and as I say, I haven't seen the news early evening, but Biden was supposed to be telling Russia that they didn't want to buy any more of their oil. I don't know how much they do buy. In fact, they've quite a lot of reserves of their own, and with fracking and so on, likely to come back, even in this country and certainly in Europe, anywhere they can. They'll be squeezing oil out of the ground. So it's going to be a bit of a bonanza, I think, for some of the North Sea operators that have had leases that have looked like they were going to expire before they'd made any money out of them. I think we're going to go back into the North Sea oil exploration business. It's inevitable.
It's a case of cost per barrel, isn't it? That fracking and the like suddenly becomes a viable prospect. It's expensive,
yeah,
and it's driven away by sort of a race to the bottom in low oil prices, whether that be from Saudi Arabia or wherever, or Russia or whoever fighting the price down per barrel. It suddenly doesn't become worthwhile doing the fracking, for example.
Well, this morning's Brent crude price was, what was it, 129.9 a barrel, and that fracking becomes viable again. Still expensive, but it's viable at those sorts of numbers.
Well, on a slightly lighter note, you may remember, anyone who was listening last week, that I had a few problems with the Skoda. Now, I was pretty much convinced that it was the dreaded head gasket failure, which isn't that common on VR6s, but isn't unknown from looking through a few forums. Apparently, the engines are fairly common over in the States, where, until fairly recently, fuel was quite a lot cheaper, and so they could afford to run them. They're not as common over here. A lot of things like the VW Atlas and various SUVs that Volkswagen build over there have the VR6 engine in. And from a bit of research, it does seem that head gasket failure wasn't unknown, but more at high mileages, which mine hasn't got. It's only about 50,000 miles on it. Anyway, I took it to my my car doctor, my well-respected chap who's looked after my cars for a long time, VW master mechanic who knows this stuff inside out. He's given it the full once-over and has declared it free of head gasket failure, pretty much. He's done the whole hydrocarbon sniff test in the coolant. He's basically given it a good long run. There's no white smoke. It's not using coolant any more than it would normally. So he reckons at worst I've got a little coolant leak, so I've got to run it, do some longer runs over the next couple of weeks, which might be open to question if there are queues at fuel stations again and if fuel's stratospherically expensive, but we'll see how
if you thought head gasket failure was expensive, try filling the tank up and doing a long run to see if the head gasket has gone.
Exactly. How far down the road can you get? Oh, that's it. End of the road. Right. Seems all right at the minute. I think we'll park it just to be on the safe side. But yes, I think
the pile of Rover 25s.
Yeah, exactly. It's no K series, thank God. But no, in the grand scheme of things, I think I've got away lightly there. I was fully expecting the couple of grand to take the head off, and he said, you don't really want to do that unless you absolutely have to. And he said, at the minute, we don't need to. It seems all right. So, good news.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
May have dodged something there, fingers crossed. Which means that if things do calm down a bit, I might be able to do some longer journeys, but maybe not quite as long as some that we've been mooting between ourselves.
Well, no, but surely if you just need to go somewhere and run it for a long period of time, why don't you bring it along on the next track day that we take the Fist to? You've got a choice. We've booked Brands Hatch and Goodwood, so you can take your pick there, or why not do both and just see what happens? And that'll definitely either kill it or cure it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, kill or cure. Could be interesting, yeah. I mean, again, would I be able to afford the fuel just to get it around one lap by that point? Or even get it to the circuit?
Well, it's at some point, there must be, and I dare say there might be a market for this at some point in the not-too-distant future. You know, if it's not being used on the road fuel, then do you have to pay the duties? So is there some sort of market? All of a sudden, our diesels are going to become the track day weapon of choice, as red diesel is a bit more readily available than red petrol, because I don't think that's a thing, is it? But if you could somehow get duty-free petrol only for use on track days or red diesel, then actually that could be quite a lucrative market.
Do you know, I'm waiting for the gas genes to come back from World War II, where they used to have these bags of coal gas on the roof. Have you ever seen those?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Or driving along with a coal gas extractor on a trailer behind you, pumping it into the car. Yeah.
Pumping it into the car.
Yeah.
They were running on coal gas.
Wow. Man, I mean, I'm looking forward to this being an environmentally green strategy for 2030. This is going to be running on coal gas from a trailer behind you.
Talk about going backwards very, very fast.
That sounds like a great idea.
I think we might have to put some links to this on the website.
You need.
I
to see
genuinely
the
have
pictures.
no idea what you're talking about. It has to be said.
Definitely links then.
Yeah, definitely. It needs to be seen to be believed.
Yeah.
Desperate time, desperate measures, and I think we're pretty much there again, aren't we?
Well, I know in extremis I've got a sort of half a tank full of heating oil out there, which I may choose to use that in the car and shiver at home.
Put a jumper on, man.
The jumper won't make the car go.
Well, no, but it keeps your house warm. Well, it keeps you warm in your house.
I don't know that the heating oil will make the car go, but it might be an experiment if I could afford it. The ramifications
It's got to be
are
worth a try, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
speaking of links and speaking of track days, I did spot something on collecting cars this week, and it was they've got some obviously rare and unusual cars on there, and then they do automobilia as well, and
yes.
F1 show cars and things like that you can pick up. Personalised number plate, so not that we're endorsed by collecting cars, but if they do want to sponsor this podcast, then we will happily collect some more cars for them.
Chris, if you're listening.
But one thing that caught my eye this week was and I've just sent a link in the group, and we'll stick that up on our various channels, was a replica of a 1992 Ferrari Formula One car. And sort of in the intrepidness of engineering, it was built by a guy who happened to live near the factory, the Ferrari Formula One factory, and knew a couple of people there. So the way they've worded the description was quite clever. It was, sort of almost pleading the Fifth Amendment. Parts that were bound for the skip were rediverted into an alternate supply chain, shall we say. So he basically nicked a load of bits out of the bin out of the back of Maranello, and glued this almost perfect replica of a 1992 F92A together, and shoved a 2-litre Alfa Romeo twin can engine into the back of it with a manual gearbox in it, and this looks like a hell of a track day toy.
It does look proper.
I mean, at the moment, with 4 days left to go, it's a €12,000 track day toy. But what a track day toy! This
Seems
is rather
cheap.
spectacular. This.
You should definitely buy this. As your friend and fellow podcaster, I think it's only fair that I should say you must buy this.
To be honest, if it was €12,000, buy it now. I might be half tempted to say, sod it, let's have it. But I dare say it'll probably go a little bit higher than that with 4 days to go. But
I just like the idea of popping your garage door open and your name saying, I wonder what he's doing in there today. Oh, he's got a Formula One car in there. Fantastic.
Why not, indeed?
Yeah, fire that up in the garage.
I'm just wondering how much work you would need to do to it to make it road legal.
Oh, a lot.
Yes.
I have seen fairly recently, in the last couple of years, not very far from me. I've only seen it the once, and I was sort of shocked and open-mouthed. And it was a Ferrari Formula One car on the road. How it was powered, I don't know. It sounded very nice, and it appeared to be full size. So somebody had built a replica of some sort, a Schumacher car, but it just shot past while I was playing with grandson in the park, and I was sort of, where'd that come from? Never seen it since.
It sounds like a fever dream almost. Things like that. I mean, I'm just looking at these pictures. Stunning.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
It is amazing. We were talking last week about sort of the liveries of Formula One and saying how lovely it was that Ferrari seemed to have gone back to the classic Rosso Corsa and black colour scheme. And there it is, right in front of you. That's exactly what we were talking about. And that design, that is just an economy of curves. It's just perfect. It's the perfect shape. I think that and the Jordan of the era, Eddie Jordan's first car, the 7-Up one that gave Michael Schumacher his start in Formula One. That, again, it's that just beautiful, absolutely form and function, and the two going hand in hand. It's a lovely looking thing. The only thing I think that would improve it would be if they took out the 4-cylinder Alpha engine and stuck in the V6. If you stuck the 3-litre Busso V6, it would have the soundtrack to go with the looks, I'd say.
And straight pipe it.
Yeah, you need the V12 in there, really. If you're going to do an engine swap, Go all the way.
Put 2 V6s in.
Actually, talking of 2-litre red Italian cars, this is apropos of nothing. My next door neighbour has been restoring to road use a 2008 Alpha Spider, the Brera without a roof.
Pretty.
Which is absolutely gorgeous. And he's got it on the road now. It's got an MOT and it's running and it looks absolutely gorgeous. He's polished it. He's put the rear bumper on that was all knackered. And yes, it still steams up inside because it's got a leaky roof. It's an Alpha after all. But my God, when he starts it and drives off, it's absolutely stunning. It's that very similar red, actually, to what I'm looking at on this fake Ferrari. It's it's a thing of beauty, and I'm so pleased he's got it going because he's so happy with it. He really has, and he's done an awful lot of work to get it where it is. He's still got a way to go. I mean, ultimately, it's an Alpha. It's always going to be a work in progress, but fair play to him. It's lovely. If you're going to spend a fortune to drive your car, you might as well make it a pretty one.
I saw somewhere today an Alpha Sud, that's just been sold at absolutely silly money, but it only got, I think, under 30,000 on the clock. I've not seen an Alpha Sud for donkey's years. They're all rusted out.
There's one that's been for sale on Auto Trader for quite a while, a silver one. Is that?
I'm not sure it's the same one. It came in on one of the news feeds that I was looking at, and it was 40 grand or something silly like that.
Oh, blimey!
I think they're quite cool looking.
They're lovely.
Yeah.
Cars.
If you can find one that isn't like a galvanised bucket that's been left out in the garden for 20 years, they're just full of holes almost immediately you get out of the factory.
One that has never been used in the rain, I think, is the answer, or ever washed, probably be better. Just never seen any kind of moisture whatsoever.
I've just found it, actually, the one on Auto Trader. It's up for sale for $19,950. It's a rare gold cloverleaf. It's 112,000 miles, 1.5 litre. Can't find the age of it. What's the reg?
It's got to be around an 88, 89, perhaps a bit earlier.
It's a Y-Reg. It's an 83. It's the one with the big headlights. So it's one of the later ones. Yeah, it looks in remarkable condition, actually. Very, very nice to look at. I mean, again, perhaps we'll stick a link up on the website. Any of them that survived are in remarkable condition, so much as they're not a pile of rust somewhere. But yeah, it does look good.
Sounds like my beloved Puma. In fact, I was chasing one home yesterday, which I very much enjoyed. I really miss my original Puma, but certainly the one that former to the fist. And there was the Puma track car, and we put that on the MOT ramp. And I seem to remember sweeping off the MOT ramp more than we drove off. Is that right? We just stuck a screwdriver through pretty much half the car, didn't we? Underneath, and just went, if we crash, the top half of this is coming off.
The whole back end of the car, to be honest, would have fallen off on if you'd run wide or bounced it across the curbs too hard. I think the subframe would have just been ripped out of it. So, a shame.
Real shame.
Why was the car, we're back there again. Why was the car and its derivative, the Puma, why were they so prone to rust? What is it about them that makes them so bad?
The Puma, I know the answer to. So it was developed very, very quickly and brought to market very quickly. It uses pretty much all the same underpinnings as the car, whatever you want to call it. We always called it a cat because if you happen to be walking around a dealership, can you get the keys for the car? It makes no sense to anybody, so cat. But the rear wheel arches in particular, if you imagine sort of a B shape, if you're looking at the one on the left-hand side, it came down and then curled round. And what happened was all the dirt used to get stuck inside the B, and there was nowhere for it to go. So it got stuck from the arch liners and then inside the back of the arches, and then it would just build up. And if you punch a hole in the back of the sort of the sill of one of these things, you could see like a stack of mud, where it would just then get into everywhere and then rust out. And it was the same for the racing Pumas, which were a standard Puma, and then they took the cars over to Tickford, much like they did with the 1600Es and RS500s, the Orion 600E, and the Sierra RS500s, and they cut into the back of the car, basically welded extra sets of arches onto the rear quarters, which then trapped even more rust. So the whole thing was just built of rust traps.
The Tickford one was great fun to drive when new, though. I remember road testing one. And it wasn't any quicker. It wasn't any more powerful. But it felt better. It was better sorted and better set up and so on. And I remember one of the roundabouts in Chichester. I went around 3 times just because I was enjoying hanging it out there. It was just great fun to drive.
It's very oversteery, lift-off oversteery, the Racing Puma. And it is one of those cars, and there's not very many that do this, but it turned me into an absolute hooligan every time I drove one. I really love them. But I do know as a fact, because Jim and I happen to know one of the development engineers for this car, that they were taking them around the test track at Dunton and they couldn't get it to go around really any faster than a standard 1.7. But the reason why they developed the car as they did, the size of it and everything else, was because it was supposed to be the next generation of rally car that would take on from the Escort Cosworth, and so would use a Cosworth 4x4 system. So it's the right size to be a Cosworth 4x4 car. And it would have been an absolute monster if they hadn't killed the program. And they did still use them in rally in the S1600 spec. But I love them. They're balanced beautifully. The 1.7 Yamaha engine is an absolute joy to drive. It's not quick, but it's revvy and it sounds fantastic. And Ford then were interested particularly in creating great drivers' cars, and they built the car just to satisfy the driver, not getting in or out, because you'd always smack your head on the A-pillar or passenger side or driver side. In fact, you get used to doing on the driver side. You'd duck at the right point, and then you'd be a passenger in your own car and smack your head on the other side. But there were some beautiful parts of the design, such as the exhaust and inlet manifolds, which they designed to create a certain noise. So there's a resonator under the engine, but they tuned the engine to make the noise. Hugely satisfying car to drive. Flawed because it had a lovely alley gear knob, which you'd put your hand in the winter and you would stick to it.
You needed to get one of those little knitted cozies that
I
think
had
you
one
bring
of
your
those, a
apples
knob
to
warmer.
work in, don't you? Yeah,
I did.
That
Yes,
was,
there's a
you
little
use
hat.
that for your apple, don't you? Yeah.
Yes, the little innocent smoothie, other smoothies are available, innocent smoothie hats that they knit around Christmas time. Had a little selection of those in the car, because otherwise, I say your hand would freeze solid to the knob, or otherwise in the summer it would be so unbelievably hot that you would get the imprint of the gear mapping on the inside of your hand in reverse. If you've ever touched a seatbelt, got into a black car and touched the metal part of the seatbelt by mistake, you know exactly what I mean. But yes, I mourn that car, and you can still put them up for a couple of grand, but unless you've got somewhere to keep it inside, if it's not already
and a
rotten.
MIG welder.
And a MIG welder.
Yeah, I think if you did have one that had been kept up to or restored or wasn't in a rusty condition, to sort that little profile on the arches, or wax oil it and then fill it up with something, to keep the muck out, then actually they're probably not too bad, are they?
They're not too bad. It's the returns underneath, whether the subframe goes, as we mentioned, can be a problem. But I did find out that if you take a Peugeot 206 front wheel arch, turn it round the other way, so the driver's side front, for example, would fit the passenger side rear on a Puma, you can swap them over, because you couldn't buy repair panels for a very long time, and the shape is the same. And I think if you did that and waxed them up nicely inside, because they tend to be like an open flange, that it's probably a lot more resistant to the rust.
The Tickford wasn't very big inside. When I was doing this 3 times around the roundabout, we were actually recording the road test for a radio station. And the producer, who was trying to record it as we went round and round and round, he was 6'4", which meant, every time I tweaked the steering just a little bit more, he'd bang his head again on the roof. So after 3, he'd had enough. 3 falls and a knockout, I think. Made for a good road test.
It's interesting you're saying about the repair parts. I was just reading something very similar in a classic car magazine that I subscribe to. They were saying exactly that Peugeot wings fit the thing, isn't it? It's amazing, isn't it? The ingenuity that people come up with and what will work and what won't. That's probably saved a lot of people a lot of heartache.
If nothing else, it was the only answer for a long time, and now it's probably still a cheaper answer, really, to be able to put the things back together. But I suspect it's one of these cars that will become an endangered species very soon, much like XR3s did. They got to a point where they were banger money, and people ran them as bangers, and these are quite resilient, in fact, to being run that way. They're pretty economical. The boots actually are surprisingly good size. And if you don't need the back seats and you just want something that's half decent to drive, or you don't really care and you just want something that looks pretty, it's fine for either of those things. But soon enough, they're going to need to find the way into the hands of people that are going to look after them, because I suspect that they'll disappear off the roads, and in a few years' time we'll look back at them and go, God, weren't they a great little car? And where are they now? I would definitely have another one, quite happily, but I would want to keep it inside, particularly as I live down by the sea. It would look very quickly if I left it parked up like it's been parked in the sea, I suspect. And on that enthusiastic chat about cats, I guess it's probably time we should say goodbye. But thank you very much for listening to us today. It's been a pleasure. So from me, Mike, goodbye.
From me, Jim, goodbye.
From me, Graham, goodbye. Take care.
And from me, Dave, goodbye. See you next time.
UK Motor Talk, a First Take Media production.